Andiamo subito alla seconda relatrice di questa sera, Elke Pahud de Montange. È professoressa di teologia dogmatica presso l'Università Albert Ludwig a Freiburg in Germania. Inoltre professoressa incaricata per gli aspetti di gender negli studi religiosi all'Università di Fribourg in Svizzera. Si dedica alla storia di teologia e di devozione nell'epoca moderna, alla storia culturale e religiosa, ai temi di gender e corpo. Insieme a Franziska Metzger ha pubblicato Luoghi e spazi del religioso dall'Ottocento al XXI secolo. Un altro suo titolo di pubblicazione si avvicina del tema di oggi, Body and Performance e Memoria, sull'anatomia della salvezza nelle culture di memoria del cristianesimo. Il titolo della sua relazione di oggi è Il Sacro Cuore come corpo e Embodiment, incorporazione, una topografia di modi e motivi, e parlerà in inglese.
First of all, thank you, Stefan, for your kind introduction. Dear audience, first, Franziska, thank you for your extremely rich and analytically dense presentation. I would now like to take up one single point and focus specially on the aspect of body and memory with regard to the Sacred Heart. I will divide my remarks into these 5 parts or steps. You will find the structure and some pictures as well on your handout you already have found, hopefully. After presenting on what my theoretical approach is based and what my analytical tools are, I will set out my main thesis on body and memory with regard to Christianity in general. The insights gained there will help us to go ahead and to analyze the Sacred Heart's body in his materiality as a memorial body. Afterwards, we will, as it were from a bird's eye view, design a preliminary schematic topography of modes and motives of embodiment of the Sacred Heart body in different bodies. This procedure is intended to allow me to create a provisional topography and to offer to all of us a theoretical framework to organize the variety of historical material we will collect in the course of this Congress. To be clear, I do not deliver a finished topography, but we will all draw it together in the course of this Congress. I doubt if there will be some time left to me to share with you a glimpse at the recoding and transcriptions in a very strict sense of structural analogy of the Sacred Heart body in modern art in the 5th step. We will see. The veneration and commemoration of the Sacred Heart was forced in the 19th century, as you know, as an instrument of ecclesiastical restoration and papal loyalty. The fact that in the majority of the cases it was represented as a very concrete piece of flesh in the chest or in the hand of a quite feminine Jesus was qualified by enlightened circles of theologians as trivialization and visceral devotion, as well as tastelessness, religious kitsch, and heaven full of perfume. Until today, this prejudice of tastelessness continues and is sublimely applied in scholarly theology. As right as it may be, inasmuch as it names excesses and exaggerations of sentimental decoration, it at the same time obscures the fact that so-called popular piety's focus on the somatic and bodily aspect of the Sacred Heart is a rather adequate understanding and expression of the fundamental anatomy of salvation in Christianity. One could even say that in a way the popular piety as a somatic religiosity has always been aware of this in a quite conscious way. To highlight this, I will applicate the category and concept of body and embodiment as theoretical framework and analytical tool in order to present and to analyze different modes and motives of embodiment and disembodiment of the Sacred Heart in the history of its devotion. Doing this, I choose a long-term analytic perspective that is oriented to motives and not to chronology. This also means that I do not take a normative approach and ask for the only correct form of representation and embodiment, but rather want to uncover the diversity of the references of the individual motives and modes of adaptations, representations, and transcriptions. The category embodiment originally came up in the 19th of the 20th century in cognitive theory, which is sometimes more philosophically, sometimes more psychologically shaped. In simplifying the insights of the cognitive theory, one could summarize: our mind would not be able to work and to think outside of our body. Our mind exists and works only as an embodied mind. This insight makes the old contrast between mind and materia obsolete. Meanwhile, the category embodiment is now as well an analytical tool in sociology and cultural science. It is especially valued in the so-called gender research area, where it is since the cult book of Judith Butler's Bodies That Matter was published in 1993, a point of no return. By applicating the category of embodiment, I situate my own approach in the gender field as well as in the historical and theological field, questioning the interference of memory and religion, of constructing religious memory by bodies who emerge through communicative and ritual practices. My main thesis of body and memory with regard to Christianity is: the memory internal structure of Christianity is somatic as well as the memorial community. Let me explain this. Usually we speak of Judaism, Christianism, and Islam as book religions. We express with this that Holy Scriptures, words and texts play a prominent role in the memory and memory cultures of these three religions. As true this statement is, it conceals the fact that in Christianity the body has a special function. In what meaning? The body in the Christian religion is not a secondary symbolization field or storage medium as it is paper, writing, words and texts. Words, texts, books already reflect, translate, represent and transform the primarily occurring revelation and salvation. The primarily occurring revelation and salvation in Christianity is a body and has an anatomy. The Word, so John 1:1, has not become a book, but flesh. So we may say the central revelation and healing data of Christianity are body events and modes of embodiment. We only mention here the Christological central data as incarnation, passion, and bodily resurrection. Not only the memory internal structure of Christianity is primarily somatic, but as well the memorial community who emerges and constitutes itself by remembering these basic datas. This memorial community forms a new supra-individual social body and social interactive space called church. In the Eucharistic celebration, this community puts into presence the missing body of Christ, who every time again embodies in the Eucharistic bread and wine as well as in the faithful by eating and drinking it. Linked by this bodily, linking by this bodily the great gap between the absence and the presence of Jesus' body, the past and the today, the divine and the human. In the following, I would like to share with you how the heart of Jesus became a memorial body. Concretely, how the process of reduction on the one hand and of universalization on the other hand took place, which led to the Sacred Heart body becoming the lieu de mémoire, the bodily representation of all what Jesus' somatic bodily passion means to mankind. But please note, the heart body of Jesus in his materiality is not a physically present remnant left over like the so-called bodily relics. The heart body of Jesus is a representative and represented memorial body that appears in different contexts, commemorations, narratives of memory, and memory constructing practices. Let's go back in time to the very beginning of Christianity in the hour of Christ's suffering. It is the last hour of Passion. Jesus' side is pierced by the lance thrust of a Roman soldier when he is already fixed on the cross. This lance piercing is the fifth and final wound of suffering which is afflicted to him. The first 4 wounds are the piercing of his hands and feet. As a result of this piercing, according to John 19:34, blood and water flowed from his side. In ecclesiastical imaginary and iconography, this lance-caused side wound of Jesus has, as Christina von Braun pointed out, a vulva-like appearance. In the course of further development, this side wound is replaced or equated by the heart of Jesus itself. It is now the Sacred Heart itself which shows exactly this vulva-shaped wound from and through which, according to the Church Fathers, the memorial social body named Church and the sacraments as practices of remembrance and memory were born. Iconographically spoken, there can be distinguished 2 principal lines, the third I have to neglect, of motifs which both documentate how this pierced and wounded heart body became a pous, a part which embodies as a pous pro toto the whole narrative of what Jesus means to mankind. In the first line, the process of abstraction is as follows. At the very beginning, we see the iconographic overall representation of Jesus on the cross, whose side is pierced with a lance. Abstraction and reduction follows when the cross is exclusively decorated with the symbols of the 5 wounds of Jesus. Please note that the 5th wound is now no longer represented as a pierced side, but as a pierced heart. So to speak, the side wound becomes the heart wound. In the sense of a further abstraction, representations are to be seen which show only and exclusively the pierced and wounded heart. In the second line, the process of abstraction is as follows. The iconographic overall is replaced by an entire Jesus figure without the cross, pointing out to his heart in his chest or holding his heart in his hand, offering it to the observer. And here as well the abstraction leads to the wounded heart body. Both motive lines end up in the representation of a detached heart that is at least decorated with various symbols of the very first overall of the Passion, the crown of thorns, the piercing, the cross. With this decoration, the heart body embodies and represents the whole Passion. It has become a real and concrete concentrate and complex condensate of it. It becomes a memorial body as well as an icon and functions as an iconographic shortcut par excellence. It may come as no surprise that the official Roman Church did not permit to use the detached decorated icon in her official cult, nor did she accept as valid to receive an indulgence by representations of the Sacred Heart without showing Jesus as a person and figure. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church established in the 19th century a normative code regarding the iconography of the Sacred Heart. This might be seen as a rejection of the sensualistic popular piety, which could be theologically spoken, qualified as an expression of the sensus fidelium of the faithful. Popular piety and private devotion developed an intense bodily and somatic religiosity with regard to the Sacred Heart body. This somatic religiosity affects and deals with all human senses: seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching. So we have to take into concern that not only the memorial body is somatic, but also the devotional appropriation and application by the faithful. The memorial body itself creates tattoos, attunes other bodies, is embodied in bodies, may it be individual bodies, social, ecclesiastical bodies, may it be geographical, political bodies. As you can see, I have chosen the shape of the overlapping circles to indicate that there are overlaps that cannot be taken into concern in my presentation now, but which will be the subject, of course, of following lectures. The embodiment of the Sacred Heart body in the heart body or on the skin of the faithful is part of a private and deeply intimate piety and devotion. I would just like to briefly mention 2 examples. As you can see in the middle, the German nun and mystic Gertrud from Helfta and Holy Francis of Assisi as the first man in the history of Christianity being stigmatized. Gertrud von Helfta reports in her book, The Herald of Divine Love, on a vision she had the day of the feast of St. John the Evangelist. In her vision she rests for a long while with St. John on the breast of Jesus. She is on the right and open and wounded side, he on the left side. Gertrude is unspeakably delighted when she hears and feels the heartbeat of Jesus. She looks at John and asks him if he had not also felt this delight the day of the Last Supper. John affirms his own delight. This listening to the heartbeat of Jesus is not only a delight for Gertrude, but it also makes her heart beating in the same rhythm of love. Gertrude enters in her vision in a quite intimate and bodily communication with the heart, body, and heartbeat of Jesus. We could name this a communicatio cordis, which also finds iconographic expression in the pictorial ecclesiastic tradition. Her heart body in her chest is marked by Jesus' heart, or even more, she is wearing baby Jesus in her own heart, which is in some pictures as well shaped as like the primarily wound. Another mode and variation of embodiment of the Sacred Heart by marking the faithful's body or skin in the sense of a physical inscription is encountered in the context of the stigmatization of the Holy Francis of Assisi. For the very first time in the history of Christianity, he as a man receives the body markings of the 5 wounds of Jesus on his skin in 1224 while he was praying on the mountain of Laverna. His stigmatization is read by Bonaventura as a union of love between Christ and Francis, as being equalized in the passion, as attracting the Jesus passion on his own skin. Francis, as a stigmatized man, is transformed in a body of memory, in a human bodily icon. In the case of Holy Gertrude, as well as in the case of Holy Francis, their mode of embodiment of the Sacred Heart is framed by a mystic and spiritual love discourse which cannot deny his hetero and homoerotic dimension and texture. I will not point out this, as this is your subject, David Morgan, later on. The Sacred Heart body embodied in social ecclesiastical bodies, as there are ecclesiastical communities, religious fraternities, prayer circles, church buildings, bodies built from stone or from people of flesh and blood. Wearing a Sacred Heart tattoo, for example, can be something very private or very public, depending on where it is stamped on the body or how or if it is covered by clothing. Wearing a small scapula, a small piece of fabric on which the Sacred Heart is printed, sometimes together with the Heart of Mary, seems as well something very personal and an expression of the most private piety. As it is to lay on one's heart, it is like a seal, or more modernly formulated, like a badge one wears to make him feel where he belongs to. Wearing the scapula must not only be something private, but it can as well be a hallmark of the members of Sacred Heart fraternities who wear the scapula on their clothes or under their clothes and document by this their forming of and belonging to a supra-individual social ecclesiastic body dedicated to the devotion of the Sacred Heart body. Not to mention the huge number of Catholic congregations devoted to the Sacred Heart. Contrary to these congregations, the fraternities are ecclesiastic communities of so-called faithful lay women who continue to live in the world, who have families, and who practice their private piety in a cooperative way by embodying and representing their dedication to the Sacred Heart. Different Sacred Heart fraternities rised in the Baroque era as an instrument and mode of counter-reformation, and especially in the 19th century as an expression of counter-revolution. as a statement against so-called Jansenism, rationalism, and all the other so-called evils of the modernity. They spread rapidly around the world. The fraternities are using banners as symbolic presentations of their social body as a community devoted to the Sacred Heart. The Day of the Sacred Heart feast, which became a universal feast of the Roman Catholic Church in the 19th century, they used to appear in public space at splendid and solemn processions. Not only these processions, but also the regular reunions and services were accompanied by religious prayers and songs expressing their special dedication to the Sacred Heart. This marching in the public space is as well a way of reclaiming the public space of society for the Sacred Heart. It leads us to the motive of embodiment of the Sacred Heart in geographic national bodies named countries, as for example France or Peru, or even in the whole world. The motive of a supra-individual geographic political embodiment rises already in the early 18th century. The Sacred Heart becomes, in a quite literal sense, not only part of the entire world, but is placed even in the center of the known world. This, as the colonial conquest of the world, which started in the 15th century from Europe, was closely connected with the will to spread Christianity geographically to the end of the world. Transferred into this global context, the Sacred Heart is loaded with an ecclesiastical, geopolitical meaning of expansion and submission. A very meaningful example of this submission of the whole world to the Sacred Heart you see right on the left. I owe this and all my knowledge about these so-called Baroque earth allegories Alexander Leichtler, who is with us and who hopefully will share his wide knowledge about with us in the upcoming discussions. The allegory you see on the left is located in the parish church of Bad Hindelang in the Oberallgäu, the southern part of today's Germany. The world is symbolized by the 4 continents known at this day: Europe, Africa, Asia, and America. In the 18th century, they commonly, and not only in a religious context, were represented by female and or male bodies, personifications. These 4 personifications of the continents bow their knees and backs in veneration of the Sacred Heart body of Jesus. Not only in the case of this painting in the parish church of Bad Hindelang, the female Europe as well offers Jesus vicariously a bowl full of burning and inflamed hearts of the faithful. The motive of embodiment taking up geographic space of expansion and submission of the world to the Sacred Heart is taken up and varied and adapted in the 19th century by popes and bishops who consecrate first ecclesiastical bodies named dioceses, then geographical political bodies named countries to the Sacred Heart. In 1899, Pope Leo XIII consecrated the whole world to the Sacred Heart. This consecration was renewed in various times, most recently by Pope Francisco in 2013. It's quite interesting that in 2016 it was the Peruvian statesman and president Pedro Pablo Kuczynski who consecrated his country to the Sacred Heart. Yes, I can continue? Okay, so I just wanted to share with you some Franziska already showed us a quite variety of examples of the reception and the transcriptions of the Sacred Heart in modern art. So I just wanted to point it out on a few single examples where you can see a structural analogy concerning, for example, the moment I was pointing on with Gertrude from Hefta with the heartbeat of Jesus. So this is something which was taken by an Austrian artist. But I want to start and share with you what the German artist and painter Joseph Beuys was doing. So he was taking a normal normal devotional paper and emphasized and transposed the aspect of concentration and universalization of the Sacred Heart in signing in 1971 in an Italian restaurant 5 little Sacred Heart devotion images with, by first sight, very enigmatic words like Jesus as the inventor of the gravitational constant, as the inventor of electricity, the inventor of nitrogen synthesis, and very quite scientific discourse, but you can see how he is trying to catch the point in a quite sensualistical way of what we point out when we talk about the universalization of what Jesus means to mankind. Then there is another transfer I really like a lot. It's the oil self-portrait painting of the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo, and this painting is called Los Dos Fridas, which was created in 1939 when Frida got divorced from Diego Rivera. And it takes up the motif of the intimate communication of the hearts, the communicatio cordis. So here it's the communication between the Sacred Heart and the communication between the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the human heart here is transformed in a self-referential communication between the artist's European heart and her Mexican heart. And last but not least, there's the motif of the heartbeat of Jesus. So there's nothing to show because it was a quite strange way of representation. So there was the Austrian artist Claudia Merzendorfer, and in the exhibition I Love God, which took place in 2012 in Graz, she did an art performance, and her art performance consisted in a long playing record made of ice with the heartbeat of her artist friend Zenita Comet. And during the performance, the record was taken out of the freezer once a week and played on the record player for several seconds before the record was melted. So, and I think it's and last but not least, so this, no, yes, it's to mention, but I will not point out. So in art fashion, so if you go this way, you will see a lot of, so in the art campaigns of Dolce & Gabbana, you already find this in the 90s and as well in the last 2 collections. And there is, and this is a picture of the adaptation of the opera La Bohème of Giacomo Puccini in 2018 in the Concerttheater of Bern, and it's wonderful, this heart being in this glass cage exposed in a museum, and it was a quite good illusion and transposition of. So it's I can't tell you all this, but I hope I will point it out in my written presentation. Thank you so much.
Grazie Elke per questa presentazione, di prendere il concetto di embodiment e di vedere come si può applicare al Sacro Cuore questo concetto e quali sono i movimenti possibili, quali sono le trasformazioni possibili, quali sono le dinamiche che metto anche fine a qualche opposizione originaria, direi.